can contribute $250 because I believe in supporting DSA candidates. We fight together. If you're a DSA's endorsement, you're never fighting alone. Because when we fight, we win. When we fight, we win.
Today, we actually have a guest on. We don't often do that, if we have ever. But we have City Council candidate Frankie Santos Fritz, City Council of Greenbelt candidate, on today to discuss his campaign and his platform. So, hello, Frankie. How you doing?
Good. How are you, Tony?
I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay.
Really looking forward to today's conversation. It's been a good campaign. Got to meet a lot of exciting people. Get to do conversations like this one. So very excited to be here.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and about your campaign, and maybe a little bit about the city of Greenbelt and why it's so special and kind of unique.
Yeah. So my name is Frankie Santos Fritz, as you said. I am running for Greenbelt City Council in the November 4th election. So if you know anyone who lives in the city of Greenbelt, Maryland, please encourage them to vote. And please let them know that they aren't registered to vote. They have to register to vote in a city election by October 6th. So that is the deadline. So make sure your friends are registered and make sure they turn out and vote on or before November 4th. I've been a community organizer since I moved to the DMV for college about 12 years ago. I've done a variety of different campaigns. My first campaign was on fossil fuel divestment, but I also did campus labor organizing and general labor organizing. I've worked in the labor movement as a staffer, and I've also worked on numerous election campaigns as well. And currently I'm a policy staffer in local government. I work on public safety and housing policy. And I think just the way the state of the country is right now, we really need to get more people involved in our political process. In the last election, only 1 in 6 of my neighbors who were eligible to vote voted in the last election. But we know that all of our neighbors are being impacted by the attacks of the Trump administration. Whether it's our neighbors like Kilmar Abrego Garcia, one town over in Eldsville, who sought justice. His family sought justice for him and continued to seek justice for him at the Greenbelt courthouse right in our city, right here. So this is a very local story. Kilmar is only 1 year older than I am. He's 31. He has 3 kids, and he was kidnapped by ICE and deported to El Salvador. But he was actually kidnapped at the local IKEA here.
Really?
About a 12-minute drive from my house.
I've been there
every day. So, these are incredibly personal stories. He's a member of CASA. I've been endorsed by the political arm of CASA in Action, because, we have that shared vision that we need to be a welcoming community for immigrants and build an economy that works for all working people. So these are really local issues that impact us locally. Obviously, both, I live right off of the Baltimore-Washington Parkway in Greenbelt, which runs through our city. And now Baltimore and Washington are facing increasing federal threats of occupation. Obviously, DC is being occupied, and I've long been a supporter of DC's statehood. But now, those same tactics that were tested in LA, tested in DC, are now being threatened to Baltimore, which would basically put almost all of the metro areas in Maryland under occupation. Terrifying precedent of what a president can do if we allow him to do that and we don't fight back. So the short answer is a lot of our neighbors aren't participating in these local elections. And we don't know how many more of these elections we're going to have if we're not organized to fight back, right? I can't tell my neighbors. I know what the future Greenbelt's going to look like if I wait 2 more years to run. So, I've always been interested, obviously, in politics. I've always been interested in getting involved, but and I've long been an organizer, but I really do feel like now we are at such a unique moment that we can't wait much longer to be getting people engaged, using every platform we can to be talking about what's going wrong in our country and how we need to get organized to fight back.
Yeah, definitely. So kind of on that topic, because you mentioned the occupation of DC,
Right.
I think we all feel a great sense of rage and disappointment at the city government in DC. And what do you think local leaders should be doing right now um, to kind of prevent, I think, the tragedy of DC, which was just our local leaders completely abandoning the public? What can people with a conscience do if they're local officials and facing
Yeah.
this kind of occupation? I know it's a little bigger than the scope of Greenbelt, but I just thought I'd get your thoughts on it.
No, but it's important. Many of our residents in Greenbelt, the number one place where people in Greenbelt go to work when they leave the city is Washington D.C. So I mean,
Mhm.
it really, it's our economy. We have a lot of federal jobs here, but we have a lot of federal employees here who commute into D.C.
Right.
And obviously our friends and neighbors. I can't tell you how many of my neighbors, like me, lived in D.C. before moving out to Greenbelt or moving out
Mhm.
to Silver Spring or moving out to wherever. A lot of people come to the region via D.C. And then they move outwards into the suburbs. But we still have a deep emotional connection to Washington D.C. Obviously, there's a lot of blame to go around, but I do think that the lack of a consistent message from local government, they're not acting as if they're all on the same team. Mayor Bowser is very much trying to accommodate President Trump.
Yeah.
And I think tactically do so as well. I think that she is frustrated with the progressives on council, and she realizes that she can use this as a cudgel against them, right? Saying that, oh, we all need to unite around me, the mayor, um, uh, in the face of these attacks, while also helping give the president the ideological ammunition he needs to say that, which is not true, that crime is out of control, that DC is somehow one of the most dangerous places on earth. It's not, um, you know, and giving into those narratives. Was the first victory. Not challenging those narratives in the media when the media kind of echoes those narratives. The local government has a responsibility to actually talk about the truth about
Mhm.
facts on the ground. What's going right, what's getting better. We did see a lot of violence after COVID. Understandably, it was a very disruptive time, but that has almost entirely subsided.
Yeah.
And we've made a lot of progress, but there's a lot of work to be done. And definitely the fact when the attorney general is trying to sue the president for the DC Attorney General Brian Schwab is trying to
Right.
sue the president for illegal breaches of power, but the mayor is basically accommodating him. That's not real leadership, right?
Yeah.
We all need to be on the same page. We need to be kind of speaking with one message. Sometimes it might take some time to figure out what that message is, but it seems very clear to me that President that President Trump has successfully played the local officials against one another in a way that he's trying to do in New York City too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
He's trying to play officials off of one another, and there are some, ostensibly strong Democrats who are taking the bait. I mean, it's absolute nonsense that I'm glad that my Senator Chris Van Hollen called out New York
Yeah.
leaders for not stepping in and endorsing Zoran Mondani, who I was very
Absolutely. Yeah.
campaign for. So Donald Trump is doing these tricks, and with any kind of occupation, right? It depends upon compliance at the local
Absolutely. Yeah.
level. Whether it's if you zoom out, there's a great interview on the Dig about the kind of the architecture of fascism and the police state, and how it responds to our current moment, and to what degree colonialism looks like our current situation. DC is a federal colony.
Yep.
They can't administer it federally. They don't understand. Like Congress people don't know anything about DC.
No, they don't.
The president knows nothing about DC besides him taking his limo one block to a steakhouse. That's the extent of DC, and then driving through DC to get to his golf course in Virginia. Right? He doesn't know DC. Without local cooperation, they don't really have the expertise on how to do this. And I think we have a mayor who's much more interested in protecting her title and rather than fighting back. I think the mayor is probably afraid that one day she won't be mayor and that Trump could have her removed or abolish the city government. Well, we can't act as though any level of compliance is going to get Donald Trump to work with us and to act in the interests of our region. He is diametrically opposed to our region, and we can't accommodate him.
Yeah, what I don't get is like accommodating him has literally never worked.
Yeah.
Newsom was trying to, accommodate him in like a way, and then the National Guard got sent there. Pritzker refused to accommodate him, and there are no National Guards being federalized in Illinois, so I find that very interesting. I try to ask the Newsom defenders about that one. They don't like it.
Yeah, and you look at the sheer number of cities he's threatening, right?
What
he doesn't have the capacity.
another thing I really just don't understand is how Bowser thinks that people will be happy that she's capitulated, or that will somehow be on her side if she tries to use the occupation to take on the progressives. I genuinely cannot understand the calculations going on in some of these people's heads. So, but I think I think that's why it's really important for, smaller jurisdictions and local leaders to really fill the vacuum, because there's a huge vacuum being left by local leaders. Back a little bit to the more local aspect. I know Greenbelt's a really kind of unique place. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it and its history and what attracted you to it?
Yeah, I'm deeply enamored with the history of Greenbelt. I've been studying it since I first heard about the city. Really, I think people in the Metro DC area, if you ride WMATA, the Metro Rail system, at the end of the Green Line, you'll hear about Greenbelt. But I know about as much about Greenbelt as I know about Shady Grove or Franconia, Springfield. Right? What? Those are just names. And
Metro
then
stations.
metro stations, terminal metro stations. So you hear the name a little bit when you're riding the lines, but you don't really think much of it. And then I heard that there was a planned community during the New Deal that was built as a federal relief project and operated as working class housing and what we would call now, I think, social housing for many decades. And then it was privatized. But the neighbors came together and bought it out as a cooperative.
Really?
Today, it is still Maryland's oldest and largest housing cooperative with over 1,400 units, and I'm happy to be a member of that cooperative. But I actually didn't put together that it was the same Greenbelt as at the end of the Green Line on the Metro. And once I found that out, I knew I had to come visit. I organized a group with some friends. We did a little tour group. There's a little museum you can do, learn about the history and the construction of the city. And it really was such a shining example of how 13,000 people during the New Deal, a lot of these folks were unhoused. A lot of these folks were suffering from disease because it had been several years into the Great Depression. 5 years into the Great Depression, a lot of people had suffered quite a bit. The federal government said, we're going to put you back to work and we're going to get you medical treatment, and then we're going to ship you out, and we're going to build this federal community 13 miles from the White House, which, that's just not a hard day, but, back then, it was all wooded, right? This was mostly farmland. The DC was a much smaller city, and the region was far less populated than it is now. So I looked into that history. I found it interesting. I actually gave a talk to Metro DC DSA about it through our Socialist Night School series 2021. And I always knew that it was the kind of place that I wanted to live in, and not only do they have a housing cooperative, but still to this day, there's a series of cooperatives, some of which trace their history back to the founding in 1937. Of economic cooperatives, membership cooperatives, like a cooperative cafe, a cooperative supermarket. We have a tool library in the city center. We have a not-for-profit movie theater, supported by the community. In Greenbelt, you can be a member of, 6 or 7 credit unions, cooperatives, housing cooperatives, grocery stores. And none of these are run for profit. They're run by the members for the benefit of the community. So it was really seen as the left wing of the New Deal, and it was ferociously attacked, as you would imagine it would be, for being that. But an experiment that working people didn't need to live in substandard housing, that they could live in spacious, beautiful housing in walkable, beautiful neighborhoods. And a lot of that infrastructure is still in place today. We've done a really good job of preserving that. And that really makes up the core of what we call Greenbelt Center or Old Greenbelt. So it's a really vibrant community with a rich history. It has a really unique architectural style, a lot of Art Deco and some Bauhaus inspired architecture for the architecture folks. I know a lot of folks love to walk through and just look at the buildings. There's a lot of public art as well. That was very important. Artists were put to work to create public art for the city during the New Deal as well. So really, it was an experiment of what you could do with the political will to make people's lives better and model a community that is not rooted just in profitability, but is rooted in a high quality of life and community.
Wow, that that makes me happy and sad all at the same time.
Yeah, the path not chosen in a
Yeah.
lot of ways.
Yeah.
We tried it out, and we said, no, why don't we build a bunch of exurban, sprawling, single-family homes, Levitt towns, and that definitely people. Greenbelt is cited as kind of the first suburb, or one of the first suburbs, because it was built before World War II.
Right.
Suburbs kind of took some parts of that, like larger homes, and made them worse, right?
Yeah.
And made it very hyper-capitalistic, and gave us kind of the suburban landscape that I think a lot of people are still very frustrated with today.
Absolutely. So what are the biggest challenges that Greenbelt is facing, and what are you interested in achieving if you win the city council race?
Yeah, I think you have to foreground just once again the federal attacks on our neighbors, whether our immigrant neighbors are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning neighbors. Those attacks have been terrifying to folks. And especially our economy is heavily dependent upon federal jobs. A lot of our folks are employed at NASA, which is based in Greenbelt, just outside the city limits. There's the USDA has the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center, which has been doing incredible research for, I think, at least 90, if not 100 years. And really piloted a lot of technology that has improved our agricultural system, a lot of research that wasn't being done by the private sector. And now Trump wants to break it up into several smaller research centers and deposit them across the country, causing all the folks here to either have to choose to move to Minneapolis, or not even Minneapolis, Minnesota, or Oklahoma, or wherever in the country, when they wanted to come to this facility that had been open for 90 years plus, that has received a lot of investment. So we're just going to shut it down. And other facilities, obviously, we have folks who work in Social Security. We have folks who work in any federal agency you can imagine, just because of our proximity to Washington, D.C. And that is really a strong basis of our economy. And we do need to diversify our economy. We need to create more opportunities for local wealth building and economic prosperity for working class people. And unfortunately, we can no longer rely upon the federal government, which was once seen as a gateway to the middle class, getting a federal job, especially for women and Black and brown folks who, oftentimes were passed over for opportunities in the private sector. The federal government was one of the first, sectors to do that, and to really integrate much faster and give opportunities to folks. Trump now attacks those people as DEI hires, when, if you actually look at the fact, many of these folks are some of the most highly educated people in this country, right?
Absolutely.
If you look at federal employees, we have some of the smartest people. One of my neighbors here in Greenbelt is a published, works at NASA and is a published author on the ionosphere of the sun. And I don't even know, candidly, what that actually entails day to day. I don't know what NASA is researching day to day when it comes to the sun, because it's so far out of my scope as a humanities major. But I'm glad someone is doing that
I was gonna say,
research, right? We need to know that. We need to know if there are developments. There's certain spots, heat spots in the sun that could impact agricultural productivity. You think that would be something that the government would want to know about?
yeah.
And even the private sector benefits from that knowledge, but they don't want to pay for it directly, right?
And one thing I think I've seen missing from the conversation, especially around federal workers,
Right.
is that many contractors are federal workers in everything but name only. Like, you carry a federal badge, you go to the building every day. If it's a uniform job, you are literally wearing a uniform but working for a private company, making them private profits. And
Right.
it makes me really angry because I think a lot of people do want to serve, but all that private contracting does is let capital owners skim off the top,
Yep.
and it prevents, unionization, and lets them hire and fire as they want to. And it makes me really angry. And what I'd like to see more of, I think, is worker solidarity between contractors and federal workers. Because for a long time, Fed was like the safe job. Like, if you got there, you made it. But like, really, we all should have been like, hey, why the fuck are we hiring contractors in the first place? This is
Yeah.
insane. These people should be employees. They are employees. In fact, when these contracts go away or change hands, the employees from the companies often move companies
Yep.
to stay at the federal department that they're at. So
Or train their replacement. It's
that.
yeah.
And
I mean, no, it is privatization
yeah,
by another name. It is skimming off the top is exactly the right framing. It's
yeah.
not that it's a combination of Reaganomics. Reagan never shrank the government. He
Nope.
just changed what it did, and he moved things around, and then a lot of folks got rich off of those changes, right? So I mean,
And tricked everybody into thinking it was cheaper and more efficient. Literally.
I mean, Trump wants to give $50,000 hiring bonuses to hire more ICE agents, and he wants to close right here in Greenbelt the visitor center at NASA Goddard, which is like, once again, these folks who call themselves, supposedly pro-family and all that. Don't you want like young people to dream about like getting into like science and technology? To think that maybe they could do something other than build bombs, that they could help research space, or help expand humanity's knowledge in some way. Closing the visitor center is such a cruel and unnecessary decision. It doesn't save any money in any meaningful sense, but it's about his priority. He wants to shift the focus away from the government, kind of doing this kind of public research that brings a lot of value to a lot of people. And I think most Americans, we'd all, myself included, taken this for granted, that it would always just be there, right? It's like, oh, of course the government's going to fund research. That's not partisan, right? It's like, but just the dismantling of the health systems under RFK, or dismantling of scientific knowledge when it comes to the climate at NOAA or our planet. It's also like, these are the people that are watching out for like asteroids that are barreling towards Earth, right? These are really important things that there's no private incentive to do these things. There's not profitability in doing these things. There is a really important public role, but he doesn't want that. He wants to loot our government so that he can fund tax cuts for billionaires like himself, and have his stormtrooper army of ICE agents, turning ICE into the largest law enforcement federal agency in the country by several fold, and making sure that all of our cities are operating in fear, rather than, because he doesn't see the cities as his constituents. He sees them as people to be controlled and disciplined, and that's the role he's trying to enforce with these with these actions. And it's really important that as Greenbelters, we call that out, and we really start organizing within our city. And then once we've organized our city, we can show other cities how to organize and kind of build a coalition of communities across this country to push back. Because I do think that these things are unpopular, but just being unpopular doesn't mean that we have built an alternative, right? And that's kind of the big problem that a lot of communities are facing is that yes, these cuts are unpopular, but unfortunately, who's even more unpopular? A lot of the establishment Democrats who have been promising us that they have a plan to help us.
Have they
Uh,
even promised that?
they implicitly they were saying that we we can figure something out, and they really have been shown time and time again. You can argue the first Trump election was a fluke.
Yeah.
And that, but the second one wasn't a fluke. At a certain point, they just ran out of answers. People voted, to get Trump out in 2020 because they wanted to go back to normal, and quote unquote normal never came. People, I mean, I saw one estimate. This is not the scientific estimate, but just that if you look at how much our buying power has been cut since COVID, right?
Mhm.
How much more prices have gone up?
Yeah.
I've seen estimates like 20% of your buying
Mhm.
power
Mhm.
disappeared in 5 years.
Yeah.
And you think about what impact that has to people. If imagine you've been saving your whole life, right? And then overnight, or in the blink of an eye, relatively speaking, you know, 20% of your savings were just taken off the top.
Yep.
And what answer did the Democrats have for that? They didn't have one. And I think that's why Zoran was so successful, was he did laser in on that folks realized that they're getting ripped off. That there is a corporate elite that is more profitable than ever. And Donald Trump's solution is to cut taxes. The Democrats should be kicking his ass right now, right? He should be absolutely fearful for his political career, but he's consolidating his political power in a way we've never seen a president do in recent memory.
Well, it's because opposition is not enough. I mean, I think maybe went over some of our heads in 2016 was just because someone was trashing Trump didn't mean they were actually on your side. I think even I was like, I couldn't really see how sinister it all was until after the Democrats came back to power. And I've certainly noticed it again now that they're out of power. But yeah, I think that was one thing that a lot of people thought. They're like, oh, well, if you don't like Trump, then you're going to make the economy better. You're going to do good stuff for me. Yeah, no, no, we're going to let Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, two people whose political careers are over, by the way,
Right. Mhm.
walk all over us, pretend that they're for voting rights, but not against getting rid of the filibuster, which has only been used to step on voting rights, pretty much. Um, yeah, and I think, fortunately, more people than just me noticed that.
Right. And
I sense this deep rage in people who are going to be voting in primaries next year, and there just needs to be the candidates there, like the genuine candidates. It's why I'm so glad that people are running directly from the DSA ranks. Yeah, can you talk a little bit about your time in the DSA and like why you think it's such an important organization and like what you think their strategy should be and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I joined DSA after Trump won. I'd heard a little bit about them beforehand, especially they first really crossed my radar during Bernie's campaign. They
Mhm.
kind of were one of the first groups and most vocal groups to endorse Bernie early on, and unapologetically call themselves socialists.
Right.
But I was a campaigner for a bunch of issues uh, on college campuses. So, I didn't feel a need to join another group at that time. But after Trump won, I realized that the movements that I cared about, the labor movement, the climate movement, that we were fighting tooth and nail on these really narrow campaigns, right? We were fighting incremental campaigns under Obama, and sometimes making some headway. We made a lot of headway to stop the Keystone XL pipeline. That was a big issue during the latter years of the Obama administration. I was concerned about, unionizing workplaces. How do we do that? Some victories were starting to slowly be won in the final years of the Obama administration. And then all that work that we had just went up in smoke, right?
Mhm.
Donald Trump ran on opposing all the things we had worked so hard to win.
Yeah.
And people had promised us, the Democrats had promised us, don't worry, he can never win. And I think we all kind of deluded ourselves into thinking that. But he actually ran in 2016 a very successful populist campaign. And he was able to win, I think, mostly on the despair of the electorate. Things had gotten really bad across the country.
Yeah.
Those after the recession, those were the first times that in multiple years in a row, the U.S. life expectancy went down.
Mhm.
Really pointing to a really dire situation that the few threads that we were hanging on to before the recession were snapping, and that was across the board. And I think that I realized that we could no longer fight single issue campaigns, right? If we looked at like mass incarceration in the prison industrial complex, if we looked at climate change, if we looked at Palestine, if we looked at all these issues, we could no longer be fighting these issues separately.
Right.
That there is an overarching system that is causing this much violence and harm in our communities. And at a certain level, I didn't have the language for it at the time, but democracy can't survive if the average voter's living standards continue to go down.
Mm-hmm.
Because people at a certain point are going to lose faith in popular government, in electoral participation, and they're going to vote for the nihilistic candidate, or not vote at all, because it's like, what is the government doing for me? Why does it matter, right? It's like, I don't, if you're an activist on one or two issues, maybe you continue to vote, but most people aren't activists. Most people are trying to survive. And I think that DSA represented the best attempt to bring all of these movements under one tent, and organize politically a party, not like a Democratic Party or a Republican Party, but an actual organization with a shared political goal. And those goals are set democratically. So the Democratic, and I long considered myself a socialist, but I realized that you can only call yourself a socialist for so long without joining an organization, because you can't be an individualistic socialist. It doesn't.
True.
It's a contradiction in terms, and sometimes that means you have to figure out how to persuade your comrades in your organization to work on your priority, right? Because we can't do everything all at once, but sometimes we need to make a plan together. We need to be able to debate that plan. And there's this term that I find really powerful. It comes from, I believe, I don't know if it's a direct translation, but it comes from the Italian writer Antonio Gramsci, and it's called the organic intellectual. And it's not organic as in like a farmer's market organic, it's organic as in organizational, right? That people develop skills by being part of an organization, right? I don't know if you're ever in student government or a club or even like a fraternity and you ran for an office in that. You've built up that skills of how to win an election. You learned how to run an organization, how to fundraise for an organization, how to recruit, right? These are skills that need to be learned and taught. And since Reagan, there has been an all-out assault on those key institutions of working class democracy, like labor unions, right? Labor unions and even the existing labor unions today are not nearly as robust and democratic as they were in the heyday of the CIO. They would have huge conventions like DSA does now, huge conventions of thousands of members, and they would debate things like foreign policy to set the goals of their organization. They would debate a variety of topics, like they would debate what holidays they should support in their contracts, right? should we try to make Election Day a holiday across all of our locals across this country? And then thousands of delegates representing millions of workers would vote on those priorities. And then the unions, if they were democratic, would actually try to carry out those priorities together. And you know, it's funny because today we're still trying to get Election Day as a holiday in this country, right? But unions have been talking about that for a long time. And you know, you can secure it as a holiday by the federal government, but they also secured it as a holiday from their employer, right? So I find those, DSA is bringing back that spirit of the organic intellectual, in that people are learning how to use working class democracy to achieve political objectives. And as we can scale that up, I think we can make a huge change in this country very quickly. And I think Zohran Mamdani is the #1 example of that. That you can go from a relatively fringe group, but if you build cohesive collective power across an entire city, and you can call people to action. They mobilized 50,000 volunteers, and I was one of them. I went up there twice to canvass for him. It was some of the best canvassing, besides for myself, that I've ever done. And I highly recommend, if you're available, to canvass for my campaign, but also to try and phone bank and canvass in New York City if you have the time and ability. It's a really eye-opening experience, and people resonated so much. And a lot of the people we were talking to, a lot of them were young people under 40 who had never voted in a mayoral election before. And they were thanking us for knocking doors and asking them to come out and vote.
Yeah.
Especially when they heard about his platform to freeze the rent, when they heard about fast and frequent busing and universal pre-K. So I really think that DSA is probably one of my favorite organizations I've ever been a part of, because it makes me feel powerful, because I feel like I'm part of a collective that can get things done. And here in Metro DC, I was involved in a bunch of different fights. But the most exciting one was the fight in Montgomery County and Prince George's County, where I had served as the chair of both branches. When I lived in Montgomery County, I had served a term as chair, and then in Prince George's County, I just finished up a term as chair as well. But we fought for rent stabilization. And when we started, there were no votes for rent stabilization on the Montgomery County Council.
Did you found both of those branches, by the way?
I was involved in the founding of the Prince George's branch, but I was still living in Montgomery County. But I definitely brought my experience as a founder of the MoCo branch, and I was in a lot of the early meetings helping them draft their bylaws. And that's why you'll notice a lot of similarities between the Montgomery County and Prince George's County bylaws, because I was trying to help folks understand and learn from our mistakes, that when you're starting a new organization, a lot of times you're trying to build the perfect organization from scratch.
Right.
And you can't do it.
Nope.
Because if you have an organization with no people, it doesn't matter how nice your bylaws are. You know, I think a lot of folks spend too much time thinking, do I know enough? Do I have enough information to be an organizer? And the answer is, you need to know more about your neighbors than, you know, just you having the perfect grasp of history and knowledge. And I think that you will understand history and theory more once you go out and do the work. I think we actually do it backwards. A lot of people think, all right, we need to give people theory and then they can do praxis. And the two order one another, right? You need to understand, you need to have a grasp on what your neighbors care about before you can get them to join an organization, before you can actually debate what that organization can do. And then, you know, and it's, you know, it's cyclical or dialectical if you want to get Marxian about it. But no, this really matters. It really matters that you are getting out there and talking on the doors, because you find out what works when you are talking to real people, right? If you might have something that you really care about at your job that none of your coworkers care about. But if you want to form a union, you need to understand what the uniting concerns, what are the concerns that unite 60 to 80% of your coworkers, because that's what's going to get people out of bed to knock on doors, to make phone calls, to sign union cards. That's what's really important. And I think DSA, we're slowly rediscovering working class democracy that had been suppressed for so long in this country.
Yeah, I think, and apart from people having different concerns at work, many times people have the same concerns, but they don't talk to each other, so they don't know. So I agree, that is definitely um, part of it. Yeah, I think joining an organization is great, and just in my experience, uh, yeah, you're gonna look at other people in the organization and go, "Wow, I wish I could do that." And it's like, if you want to, you can get there. Listen, that person got there by sitting quietly in the meeting for a long time before ever speaking up. Trust me, me.
Mm-hmm.
So like, don't put, too much on yourself. Showing up is a big first step. So like, don't feel like you have to plan out everything
So,
right away. So that's how I feel about it.
right.
And yeah, DSA, it's interesting. I feel like the Democratic Party had a potential for having that kind of organizing power up until about 2012. And
Sure.
until they bribed everybody to stop organizing, I think. Um,
Right.
but yeah, I've definitely gotten like even more of that like collective action feeling and grassroots feeling from the DSA. So I definitely agree with you there.
And, and if I could say one thing about that,
Sure.
it's a lot of people, you know, and I'm not even going to say they're bad people, right? If you're a union leader or a small town mayor, it can be a really hard job sometimes, right? To be a union leader in the face of all these attacks coming from the federal government can be difficult. And sometimes you just want to make sure that the union that you've been a member of for 20 years keeps the lights on, right? So, but it is important that you have a mix of perspectives and, you're bringing up new leaders after you. And I think that a lot of folks do fear democracy, including in local government, right? So many of these local elections up in Gaithersburg, where Mola Williams is running for council, where here in Greenbelt, the vast majority of people don't even know there's an election. And unfortunately, who benefits? It's the incumbents, right? And the incumbents don't want to run. They don't. It's hard to run for reelection. It's hard. It's hard to take questions from people who don't like you. But that's part of the process.
Yeah,
That's part of
boo-hoo.
democracy. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's so I'm not trying to. I'm not trying to. I'm not trying. I understand why you want to take the shortcuts,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But that's not that. But see where it's gotten us, right?
Right.
Taking shortcuts, suddenly you realize you don't have a pulse on what's going on in your organization or in your union or in your city, and then all of a sudden you don't know how to get people organized against Trump. And I was in a meeting recently with a lot of federal labor with some labor leaders and some retired federal employees and some other employees and Greenbelt neighbors, and people in the room were asking the labor leaders, why aren't you doing a general strike? And they'd never really contemplated that because they were told it was illegal. And it's like, well, a lot of what the government is doing, yes, a lot of what the government is doing right now used to be illegal. So
What the companies are doing is illegal.
And what
the
companies
time.
oftentimes are doing is illegal.
Yeah, they straight up
mean-
break the law and then dump sewage on you and tell you that you're doing illegal things when you call an unauthorized strike. So it's like,
Right.
I don't know,
Right.
just like,
Right. The law is being wielded against organizers and working people. And it's
Yeah.
very, if there's ever any accountability, which there rarely is, it's rarely against, the people actually causing the vast majority of our problems. So, I understand on one level, you don't want your union to get busted by the federal government. On the other hand, we are in a place where the federal government doesn't care about labor law. They think labor law itself is unconstitutional. And, if they do bust your union, did you actually have the organizing relationships to call a general strike and retaliate and organize against that kind of illegal retaliation by the federal government, right? But there's such a fire in the rank and file members of our community, retired members, even workers who are just fed up.
Yeah.
And I think people are begging for leadership. And I will say, if you're living in a city where less than like 30% of your neighbors voted, that is a city ripe for new leadership. If no one ran against your union president in 20 years, that is a union that might need new leadership, right? If you're a tenant, if you have a tenant association, which most people don't, but if you do have one and they don't do anything, once again, working people are angry. They are looking for leadership. They are looking for tangible actions that they can take to fight back in their daily lives and to save what remains of our institutions in this country. So I think that now is the time to really consider running for something, whether it's a union office or being part of an organization or running for local office, to make those connections with your neighbors, because obviously other people aren't doing it. We really need to change how we think about, there's some people who lead us, and then there's everyone else, and it's like that cannot be the way we organize. We need to really get everyone at the table, and that's going to require a lot of people step up. And maybe if you're not ready to run, I encourage you to volunteer on a campaign and learn how other people do it. So maybe you can help yourself or someone else run for something a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. But we can't wait any longer. We need to be developing these skills. We need to be cultivating this analysis in everyone, and we need to be bringing people into organizations like DSA that are democratic and are unapologetically fighting for the working class.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, we got about 5 minutes left on this call. Is there anything else you wanted to say?
Get organized, join an organization. Please support my campaign as well. If you're inspired, or if you know folks who live in Greenbelt, let them know. FrankieForGreenbelt.org, FOR for Greenbelt.org. And then there's the link to contribute or volunteer. But I really do think that we have a really great shot at winning this election. The reception has been amazing. So many people have just thanked me for running, right? And you wouldn't think that in our day and age that people want people to run for office, or that a lot of people have given up on politics. But a lot of people thanked me for running, just to say thank you for trying, thank you for believing in the community, thank you for offering your time, because we need new leadership. And I think communities across the country are ready for new leadership.
Absolutely.
I think that's the story of Zoran Mondamia's campaign. I think we need more good stories like that, of people fighting back, of people saying that we don't need to bend the knee to the Andrew Cuomos or the Donald Trumps of the world, that they don't actually own this country, that working people, when organized, we can do a lot. So support my campaign, FrankieForGreenbelt.org, and then join an organization. And if you need somewhere to start, I don't think you'll go wrong if you pick DSA, DSAUSA.org. So those are the DSA is there are other organizations too, but a lot have endorsed me. But get involved in your union, form a tenant association, and then join DSA to help you with the bigger picture strategy. I know if we have unions in our workplaces, militant unions in our workplaces, real tenant organizations in our communities, and we're supporting one another. We're fighting back against ICE and police abuse, and we have DSA on the ballot. I think there's nothing we can't accomplish.
I agree. And the great thing about DSA too is it is, outside of it encompasses the workplace, but also everything outside of it, which I think unfortunately was a way they kept unions alienated from the general public. But yeah, well, Frankie Santos Fritz, candidate for City Council in Greenbelt, thank you so much for joining us today. Hope we can have you on again sometime soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and have a good weekend.
Have a good one. Thanks, Frankie.